My family thinks something is very wrong with my mind. They whisper in corners, make phone calls when they think I can't hear, and treat me like I'm already gone. But there's something they don't know about what I've been doing in the shadows for the past 6 months. Something that will make them question everything they thought they knew about the woman who raised them. It started on a Tuesday morning in October, when my daughter Sarah came to visit me unannounced. I was in my garden, tending to the roses that my late husband Robert had planted 15 years ago, when I heard her car pull into the driveway. Sarah never visited without calling first. In fact, Sarah rarely visited at all unless she needed something. The roses were Robert's pride and joy, a collection of heritage varieties that he had carefully selected and nurtured over the years. David Austin roses, bourbon roses, and climbing varieties that covered the old arbor he had built with his own hands. Even 5 years after his death, I maintained them exactly as he would have wanted to, because tending to his roses was one of the few ways I still felt connected to the man I had loved for 43 years.
"Mom," Sarah called from the back door, her voice carrying that particular tone of forced cheerfulness that people use when they're trying to hide something important. "I'm out here, dear," I replied, continuing to deadhead the last blooms of the season. The October air was crisp, and I could smell the earthy scent of leaves beginning to turn. It was my favorite time of year, when the garden prepared itself for winter's rest. When Sarah approached me in the garden, I noticed immediately that something was different. She was dressed more formally than usual for a casual visit, wearing a navy blazer over dark jeans and carrying a leather handbag that looked expensive. More telling was the way she moved, like someone with a purpose beyond a simple social call. Sarah was studying my face with the intensity of someone looking for signs of something specific. Her eyes tracked my movements, noted my expressions, cataloged every word I spoke. It was the kind of observation that made me feel like a specimen under a microscope.
"How are you feeling today, Mom?" she asked, settling onto the garden bench beside me with careful deliberation. "I'm feeling fine, Sarah. Why do you ask?" "No reason. I just worry about you living here alone since Dad died." It had been 5 years since Robert passed away from a sudden heart attack, and in all that time, Sarah had never once expressed concern about me living alone. If anything, she had seemed relieved that she didn't have to worry about caring for 2 aging parents. When Robert died, Sarah attended the funeral, helped with the immediate arrangements, and then returned to her busy life in Boston as if nothing had fundamentally changed. "I've been living alone just fine," I said, watching her carefully. "I'm 72, not 92. I know. It's just that Mrs. Patterson from next door called me yesterday." Mrs. Patterson was my neighbor of 20 years, a lovely woman in her 80s, who kept an eye on things when I traveled to visit my sister in Florida. Helen Patterson was sharp as a tack, still drove her own car, and maintained a vegetable garden that was the envy of the neighborhood. If anyone would notice unusual behavior, it would be Helen. "What did Mrs. Patterson say?" "She said she saw you talking to someone in your front yard the other day, but when she looked closer, there was no one there." I stopped pruning and looked at Sarah directly. This was interesting. Mrs. Patterson had said no such thing, because no such thing had happened. I had an excellent relationship with Helen, and she would have spoken to me directly if she had any concerns about my behavior. But Sarah was watching my reaction with the focus of a scientist observing an experiment. "I don't recall talking to anyone in the front yard," I said truthfully.
"Are you sure, Mom? She seemed pretty concerned." That's when I understood what was happening. Sarah was fishing. She was looking for signs of confusion, memory loss, or mental decline. The question was why? What had motivated this sudden interest in my mental state? Sarah, I said, keeping my voice level, did Mrs. Patterson really call you, or is there something else you want to talk about? For just a minute, her mask slipped. I saw something flash across her face. Guilt, maybe, or calculation. Then the concerned daughter expression returned, smooth as silk. Of course she called me, Mom. Why would I lie about that? I filed that question away for later consideration. Why would she lie indeed? The visit continued for another hour, with Sarah asking seemingly casual questions about my daily routine, my memory, my ability to handle household tasks. She asked if I was remembering to take my blood pressure medication. She wondered if I was paying my bills on time. She suggested that maybe I should consider having someone come in to help with housework. Are you eating regular meals? She asked. Sometimes older people forget to eat properly. I eat 3 meals a day, Sarah, just like I have for the past 72 years. And you're keeping up with doctor's appointments. I saw Dr. Williams 2 weeks ago for my annual physical. Clean bill of health as usual. What about driving? Are you comfortable driving at night? The questions kept coming, each one designed to probe for evidence of decline or incapacity. But they were asked with such careful concern that anyone listening might think Sarah was simply a loving daughter checking on her aging mother's well-being. All perfectly reasonable questions from a caring daughter, except that Sarah had never been particularly caring, and her sudden interest in my well-being felt more like an assessment than genuine concern. She also asked about my social activities, my friendships, my involvement in community organizations. Did I still volunteer at the library? Was I keeping up with my book club? Did I feel isolated or lonely? I have a very full life, Sarah, I told her. I volunteer at the Literacy Center twice a week, I play bridge every Thursday, and I'm on the board of the Historical Society. I'm hardly sitting here withering away. That's wonderful, Mom. I just want to make sure you're not taking on too much. Taking on too much, as if being actively engaged in my community was somehow a sign of poor judgment rather than good mental health. After she left, I sat in my living room and replayed the entire conversation. Something was happening. Sarah was building a case for something, collecting evidence of my supposed decline. But what was her endgame? I spent the next 2 days thinking about it, analyzing every question she had asked and every reaction she had noted. I also began thinking about my financial situation and whether that might be a factor in Sarah's sudden concern. Robert and I had been careful with money throughout our marriage. We had both worked, he as an electrical engineer and I as a high school English teacher, and we had saved and invested wisely. We owned our house outright, had substantial retirement accounts, and had built a portfolio of investments that had grown significantly over the years. When Robert died, I inherited everything. Our combined assets totaled approximately $1.8 million, including the house, investments, and cash savings. It was more money than Robert and I had ever dreamed of having when we were young, and it was certainly enough to make me financially attractive to children who might be thinking about their inheritance. Then I made a decision that would change everything. If Sarah was looking for signs that I was losing my mental faculties, I would give her exactly what she was looking for. I would play the role she seemed to want me to play, and in doing so, I would discover what she was really planning. It was a dangerous game, but I was angry. Angry that my own daughter would try to manipulate me. Angry that she would lie to my face. Angry that she apparently saw me as an obstacle to be managed rather than a mother to be respected. So I began my performance. When Sarah called me 3 days later, I made my first mistake. "Hi, Mom. How are you doing?" "Oh, hello, dear. I'm fine. How is David?" David. Mom, you mean Michael. My husband's name is Michael.
I paused, as if confused. Of course, Michael. I don't know why I said David. David was your old boyfriend from college, wasn't he? There was silence on the other end of the line. I could practically hear Sarah's mind working, filing away this evidence of my supposed confusion. Sarah had indeed dated a David in college, so my mistake had just enough basis in reality to seem like the kind of memory confusion that might occur with cognitive decline. That's okay, Mom. These things happen. Are you eating well? Oh, yes, I had a lovely dinner last night with Robert. Another pause. Mom, Dad died 5 years ago. What? No, he's right here in the kitchen. I made my voice sound genuinely confused and a little frightened. Robert? Robert, where did you go? Mom, listen to me. Dad passed away 5 years ago. Do you remember? I let my voice become small and uncertain. He did? But I could have sworn. I'm sorry, Sarah. I must be more tired than I thought. It's okay, Mom. Maybe you should get some rest. After I hung up, I felt a mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. Satisfaction because my performance had been convincing. Sadness because Sarah had sounded almost pleased by my confusion, as if my mental decline was something she had been hoping to confirm, rather than something that worried her. Over the next few weeks, I carefully crafted more incidents. I would call Sarah and ask her the same question multiple times in one conversation. I would forget the names of people we'd known for years. I would lose track of what day it was or what I had planned to do. Each incident was carefully calculated to suggest cognitive decline without being so dramatic as to trigger immediate intervention. I was walking a tightrope between being concerning enough to further Sarah's apparent agenda while not being so impaired that she would insist on immediate medical attention. The hardest part was remembering to be inconsistent. Real memory loss doesn't happen on a schedule, so I had to sometimes be perfectly clear and other times be confused. I had to remember what I had forgotten and what I still supposedly knew. I also had to be careful about which types of memory problems to simulate. I focused on recent memory issues, forgetting conversations, repeating questions, losing track of time. But I made sure to retain my long-term memories and my basic knowledge because sudden loss of those would be more alarming and might prompt immediate medical intervention. But I wasn't just performing for Sarah. I was also investigating. I began paying closer attention to the conversations happening around me, listening for clues about what might be motivating this sudden interest in my mental state. I also started thinking more carefully about family dynamics and financial pressures that might be influencing Sarah's behavior. Sarah worked as a marketing manager for a technology company in Boston. Her husband, Michael, was an architect. They lived in an expensive suburb, drove luxury cars, and maintained a lifestyle that required substantial income. They had 2 children, both in private schools, and had mentioned several times over the years that they were struggling with college savings and retirement planning. I also knew that Michael's architecture firm had been struggling since the economic downturn several years earlier. Sarah had mentioned in passing that they had refinanced their house and were dealing with higher monthly payments. Could financial pressure be motivating Sarah's sudden concern about my mental health? Was she thinking about her inheritance and worried that I might become incapacitated and need expensive care that would eat into the estate she expected to inherit? I noticed that Michael, Sarah's husband, was suddenly very interested in my financial situation. He would ask subtle questions about my investments, my retirement accounts, my mortgage status, questions disguised as casual concern about my ability to manage my finances. "How are you handling all the paperwork, Eleanor?" he asked during one visit. "Robert always took care of the investment accounts, didn't he?" "I manage fine, Michael. I may be getting older, but I'm not helpless."
Of course not. I just meant that financial planning can be complicated. Sarah and I use a financial advisor who specializes in retirement planning. Maybe you'd like to meet with him sometime. Why would I need a financial advisor? I've been managing my own money perfectly well. It's just that as we get older, it becomes harder to keep track of all the details. Having a professional oversight can be really helpful. Professional oversight. The phrase stuck with me because it sounded very much like someone preparing to argue that I needed help managing my own affairs. I also noticed that my son Thomas, who lived in California and usually called once a month, was suddenly calling every week. His conversations followed a similar pattern to Sarah's. Subtle probing about my mental state, my daily activities, my ability to live independently. Thomas worked as a software engineer for a major tech company. He was single, in his early 40s, and had always been the more distant of my two children. He had moved to California for college and never moved back, visiting only for holidays and special occasions. But suddenly, Thomas was very interested in my well-being. He asked detailed questions about my daily routine, my social activities, my health management. He wanted to know if I was keeping up with home maintenance, whether I felt safe living alone, if I ever felt overwhelmed by household responsibilities. Mom, Sarah mentioned that you've been having some memory issues lately. Memory issues? What kind of memory issues? She said you've been repeating questions and forgetting conversations. Are you having trouble keeping track of things? I played my part. I don't think so. Maybe sometimes I forget little things, but doesn't everyone? Sure, but Sarah seems worried. Maybe you should see a doctor about it. I see Dr. Williams regularly. He says I'm in excellent health. Physical health is different from cognitive health, Mom. There are specialists who can evaluate memory problems. More disturbing was the realization that they were coordinating their efforts. References to conversations I'd had with Sarah would come up in calls with Thomas. Details about my supposed confusion were clearly being shared between them. During one call, Thomas mentioned that Sarah had told him about my confusion over what day of the week it was. But I had never expressed any confusion about days of the week to Sarah. Either she was lying to Thomas or she was embellishing normal variations in attention into signs of cognitive decline. I also began noticing that they were documenting our conversations in unusual detail. Sarah would sometimes repeat back things I had said as if to confirm she had heard correctly. Thomas would ask me to clarify statements I had made, ostensibly to make sure he understood, but really, I suspected, to create a record of my supposed confusion. But the most revealing moment came 6 weeks into my performance, when I accidentally overheard a phone conversation that wasn't meant for my ears. I had gone to the bathroom during one of Sarah's visits, and when I returned, I heard her talking quietly on her phone in the kitchen. She thought I was still in the bathroom, but I had paused in the hallway when I heard her voice. "She's definitely getting worse," Sarah was saying. "Yesterday, she asked me 3 times if I remembered to feed her cat. Mom hasn't had a cat in 10 years. That was interesting, because I had never asked Sarah about feeding any cat. I had never owned a cat at all. Robert had been allergic to them. She was either lying or embellishing my supposed symptoms. Michael thinks we should talk to a lawyer about guardianship. If she can't manage her own affairs, someone needs to step in before she loses everything." Guardianship. The word hit me like a physical blow. They weren't just concerned about my well-being, they were planning to have me declared mentally incompetent so they could take control of my life and my assets. I know it seems harsh, but she's sitting on almost $2 million, and if she's really losing her mind, we need to protect that money. For her own good, of course. For her own good, the phrase that justifies every betrayal, every power grab, every act of paternalistic control. I stood frozen in the hallway, listening to my daughter discuss my future as if I were already dead. Thomas agrees. He's been documenting all the confused things she said to him. We'll need medical evidence, but Dr. Williams has been Mom's doctor for years. He'll listen to our concerns. Dr. Williams, my family doctor who had known me for 15 years and had never seen any signs of cognitive decline because there weren't any? I crept back to the bathroom and flushed the toilet, then returned to the living room as if I hadn't heard anything. Sarah was off the phone, sitting on my couch with an expression of concern that I now knew was completely fake. "Everything okay, Mom?" "Of course, dear. Why wouldn't it be?" That night, after Sarah left, I sat in Robert's old chair and tried to process what I had learned. My children weren't worried about my mental health. They were worried about my money. They were actively working together to have me declared incompetent so they could control my assets. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that it took my breath away. These were the children I had raised, the people I had loved and sacrificed for and supported through every difficulty in their lives. And they were planning to steal my autonomy, my dignity, and my life savings.
But I wasn't helpless. I was angry, and I was smart, and I had been pretending to be confused for weeks while actually observing everything with perfect clarity. It was time to turn the tables. The next morning, I called my lawyer, James Morrison, and scheduled an appointment. James had been my attorney for 12 years, handling my will, my estate planning, and various other legal matters. More importantly, he knew me well enough to recognize that my mind was as sharp as ever. James Morrison was a man in his early 60s who had built a successful practice representing older adults in matters of estate planning, elder law, and what he diplomatically called family asset protection. His office was located in the converted Victorian house downtown, and his approach to legal practice was both professional and personal. "Eleanor," he said when I arrived at his office, "you sounded upset on the phone. What can I do for you?"
I told him everything. The suspicious questions from my children, my decision to pretend to have memory problems, and, most importantly, the conversation I had overheard about guardianship proceedings. James listened without interruption, occasionally taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, tapping his pen against his desk in a rhythm that suggested he was thinking through the implications of what I had told him. "Eleanor, what you're describing is unfortunately not uncommon. Adult children sometimes convince themselves that controlling an aging parent's assets is in the parent's best interest, even when the parent is perfectly capable of managing their own affairs. What can I do to protect myself? Several things. First, I'm going to document this conversation and your current mental state. If your children try to pursue guardianship, I'll be able to testify that you came to me voluntarily, explained the situation clearly, and demonstrated perfect cognitive function." He pulled out a digital recorder from his desk drawer. "I'm going to ask you a series of questions that test memory, reasoning, and judgment. This will create a clear record of your mental competency as of today's date." For the next 30 minutes, James put me through what amounted to a comprehensive mental status exam.
I answered questions about current events, performed mathematical calculations, recalled lists of words, and demonstrated my understanding of complex legal and financial concepts. He asked me to recite the presidents in reverse chronological order, to explain the difference between a will and a trust, to calculate compound interest on a hypothetical investment, and to discuss current political issues with nuance and detail. "Eleanor," he said when we finished, "you are clearly operating at full mental capacity. Your memory is excellent, your reasoning is sound, and your judgment appears to be completely intact. Now, let's talk about how to handle your children's appearance scheme."
We discussed several options. I could confront them directly, but that would tip my hand and might cause them to accelerate their timeline. I could wait and defend myself if they actually filed for guardianship, but that would be reactive rather than proactive. Or I could continue my performance while gathering evidence of their true intentions. "If you're willing to continue this charade," James said, "I can help you document their actions. We can create a record of their attempts to manipulate your medical care, their misrepresentation of your mental state, and their coordination to gain control of your assets." How would we do that? Several ways. You could record conversations with their consent. Massachusetts requires two-party consent for recording, but if you're open about it, that requirement is satisfied. You could create a detailed journal of their actions and statements. You could even arrange for witnesses to their behavior. The idea was both appealing and terrifying. Continue pretending to lose my mind while secretly building a case against my own children? What would be the end game? I asked. That depends on how far they're willing to go. If they actually file for guardianship based on false claims about your mental state, we could pursue legal action for attempted fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy. At minimum, you would have clear evidence of their true intentions toward you. I thought about it for several days. Was I willing to continue this dangerous game? Was I prepared to discover just how far my children would go to control my life? The answer came when Thomas flew in from California for an unexpected visit. He arrived on a Friday evening, claiming he'd been worried about me and decided to come check things personally. But Thomas hadn't visited me without a specific occasion in over 3 years. His last spontaneous visit had been when Robert died, and even then he had stayed only long enough for the funeral before returning to his life in San Francisco. Thomas looked successful and confident as always, dressed in expensive casual clothes and carrying a leather laptop bag that probably cost more than many people earned in a month. But there was something different about his demeanor, a watchfulness that reminded me of Sarah's recent behavior. During dinner, which I prepared using one of Robert's favorite recipes, Thomas peppered me with questions similar to those Sarah had been asking. How was I sleeping? Was I remembering to take my medications? Had I been keeping up with paying bills? "Mom," he said over dessert, "Sarah told me you've been having some memory issues lately." I played my part. Memory issues? I don't think so. "She said you've been confused about some things, forgetting names, losing track of time."
I don't remember being confused. That's exactly what I mean, Mom. If you're having memory problems, you might not remember having memory problems. The circular logic was maddening, but I maintained my performance. This was exactly the kind of reasoning that would be used to justify overriding my autonomy. If I denied having cognitive problems, that would be taken as evidence that I had cognitive problems. Sarah also mentioned that you thought Dad was still alive. Robert's not alive? No, Mom. He died 5 years ago. Don't you remember? I let my eyes fill with tears. I miss him so much. Sometimes I forget he's gone. Thomas reached across the table and patted my hand with what appeared to be genuine sympathy. I know, Mom. That's why Sarah and I think you might need some help. What kind of help? Well, maybe someone to come in during the day. Or maybe a nice place where you could live with other people, where there would always be someone around to help you remember things. A nice place. He was already suggesting that I might need to be institutionalized, and this was only his first day here. I like living in my own house, I said. I know you do. But if your memory keeps getting worse, it might not be safe for you to live alone. That weekend, Thomas joined Sarah for what I now understood was a strategy session. They spoke in low voices in my kitchen while I pretended to nap in the living room, positioning myself so I could hear their conversation while appearing to be asleep. She's definitely declining, Thomas said. Last night, she insisted that Dad was coming home for dinner. That was a lie. I had said no such thing. But Thomas was creating a narrative that would support their plans. Dr. Williams needs to see her soon, Sarah replied. We need an official diagnosis before we can move forward with any legal steps. Have you talked to that lawyer yet? The one who specializes in elder care? Michael has a consultation scheduled for next week. We need to understand the guardianship process before Mom gets any worse. What about her finances? Do we know exactly what she has? She's got about $1.8 million total. The house is worth maybe $400,000, and the rest is in investments in cash. If we can get guardianship, we can manage everything properly. Manage everything properly. Code words for taking control of my money. The good news is that she trusts Dr. Williams completely. If he recommends a memory evaluation, she'll probably go along with it. They were moving fast, too fast. What about getting her to sign documents now while she's still cooperative? Maybe we can get power of attorney without going through the guardianship process. Michael thinks guardianship is better. It gives us more complete control, and it protects us legally if anyone questions our decisions later. That night, after Thomas had gone to his hotel, I called James Morrison's emergency number. They're accelerating the timeline, I told him. They're talking about medical evaluations and guardianship consultations. How quickly can you get to my office? Tomorrow morning. Be here at 8. We need to document everything you've observed and create a comprehensive record of their actions. The next morning, I spent 3 hours with James, providing detailed accounts of every conversation, every lie, every manipulation I had witnessed. He recorded our entire session and had me sign affidavits describing my children's behavior. Eleanor, I need to ask you a difficult question. How far are you willing to take this? What do you mean? If they try to have you declared incompetent, are you prepared to fight back publicly? Are you willing to expose their actions in court, knowing that it might permanently damage your relationship with your children? I thought about the woman who had raised 2 children, who had worked as a high school English teacher for 35 years, who had managed her family's finances and made investment decisions that had grown their modest savings into substantial wealth. I thought about the woman who had nursed her husband through his final illness and had been living independently and successfully for 5 years since his death. Then I thought about that woman being declared mentally incompetent by her own children so they could steal her life savings. I'm willing to fight, I said. Over the next month, I continued my performance while James worked behind the scenes to protect my interests. Following his advice, I installed a small digital recording device in my living room and kitchen, openly mentioning to my children that I was recording conversations to help me remember them better because of my supposed memory problems. They readily consented to the recording, probably thinking that my recorded confusion would only strengthen their case. What they didn't realize was that I was creating evidence of their manipulation and lies. I kept a detailed journal of every lie they told about my condition and every manipulation they attempted. I documented their coordination of efforts, their misrepresentation of my behavior, and their growing pressure for me to submit to medical evaluation. I also began reaching out to people who knew me well and could testify to my mental competence if necessary. I had lunch with my friend Margaret from the book club, who commented that I seemed as sharp as ever. I spent an afternoon volunteering at the Literacy Center, where the director praised my work with struggling readers. I attended a board meeting of the Historical Society and actively participated in complex discussions about fundraising and event planning.
The breakthrough came when Sarah brought Dr. Williams to my house for what she called a wellness check. Dr. Williams had been my physician for 15 years. He was a good man in his early 60s who genuinely cared about his patients. But he was also busy and relied heavily on family members to provide accurate information about his elderly patients. I knew that Sarah had been calling his office, expressing concern about my cognitive state and requesting a home visit. She had probably painted a picture of a confused, declining woman who needed immediate medical attention. "Mrs. Hayes," he said as he sat in my living room, his medical bag at his feet, "Sarah tells me you've been having some memory difficulties." I played my part perfectly, but not too dramatically. I seemed mildly confused about what day it was, needing a moment to think before answering. I couldn't immediately remember what I had eaten for breakfast, then recalled it with some prompting. I asked him twice if he knew where Robert was, as if I had forgotten that my husband had died. But I was careful not to seem completely incapacitated. I recognized Dr. Williams immediately, remembered his name, and could answer basic questions about my health and medications. I wanted to appear as someone with mild cognitive concerns, not someone in advanced dementia. Dr. Williams conducted a brief mental status exam, but it was clear that he had already been influenced by Sarah's reports of my supposed decline. When someone expects to see cognitive impairment, they tend to interpret normal variations in attention or memory as signs of dementia. He asked me to remember 3 words, count backward from 100 by sevens, and draw a clock face. I performed these tasks with just enough hesitation and minor errors to suggest mild cognitive concerns. "Mrs. Hayes," he said gently, "I think we should do some more comprehensive testing. There are excellent facilities where we can evaluate your memory and cognitive function more thoroughly." "What kind of facilities?" I asked, letting my voice sound worried. "Just places where doctors who specialize in memory problems can spend more time with you. Nothing to be frightened of." After he left, Sarah walked him to his car. I watched from my window as they had an animated conversation in my driveway. When Sarah returned, her expression was triumphant. "What did Dr. Williams say?" I asked. "He's concerned about you, Mom. He thinks you might need some professional help to figure out what's wrong with your memory." That evening, Sarah called Thomas to report on the doctor's visit. I listened from the kitchen as she spoke to him in my living room, knowing that our conversation was being recorded. "Dr. Williams is going to refer her for a full neurological evaluation," she said. "Once we have an official diagnosis of dementia, the guardianship proceedings should be straightforward." There it was, The smoking gun. Sarah had just admitted that they were using a medical evaluation to further their plan to gain control of my assets. But she wasn't finished. Michael met with the elder law attorney yesterday. He says that once we have guardianship, we can sell the house and move her into a care facility. The equity from the house plus her investments should be enough to pay for care for years. My blood ran cold. They weren't just planning to control my money. They were planning to sell my home, the house Robert and I had bought as newlyweds, where we raised our children, where every room held memories of our life together, and institutionalize me based on a deliberately orchestrated false diagnosis.
What kind of care facility? Thomas asked. Michael found a place about an hour outside the city. It's not fancy, but it's adequate for someone with dementia. The monthly cost is about $4,000, which is much less than some of the high-end places. $4,000 a month. They were planning to warehouse me in a budget facility while they controlled assets worth nearly $2 million. And what about the diagnosis? Are we sure we can get one? Dr. Williams is already concerned. The neurologist will do cognitive testing, and with her current state, a dementia diagnosis is almost certain. Michael's lawyer says that once we have medical documentation, guardianship is usually just a formality.
I had heard enough. The next morning, I called James Morrison and told him I was ready to end the charade. What do you want to do? I want to confront them, all of them, together, and I want you there to witness it. We arranged for a family meeting that Sunday. I told Sarah and Thomas that I had something important to discuss with them about my living situation. Sarah seemed pleased, probably thinking I was ready to admit that I needed help. James arrived 30 minutes early and positioned himself in my study, where he could hear everything but remain out of sight unless needed. We had prepared extensively for this confrontation, reviewing the evidence we had gathered and planning the most effective way to reveal their scheme.
When Sarah and Thomas arrived, they settled into my living room with the confidence of people who believed they were in control of the situation. Sarah carried a briefcase, and Thomas had his laptop, suggesting they had come prepared to discuss specific plans for my future. "Mom," Sarah began, "we're so glad you called this meeting. Thomas and I have been really worried about you." "Have you?" I asked. "Of course we have. We love you, and we want what's best for you. And what do you think is best for me?" Thomas leaned forward in his chair, adopting the earnest expression of someone about to deliver difficult news. "Mom, we think you need more support than you're getting living here alone. We've been looking into some really nice assisted living facilities where you could have help with daily activities and medical care." Assisted living facilities. Yes, places where you wouldn't have to worry about cooking or cleaning or remembering to take your medications. Places where there would always be someone around to help you. Help me with what exactly? Sarah and Thomas exchanged a glance, and I could see them communicating silently about how much to reveal. "Mom, you've been having memory problems. Dr. Williams is concerned about possible dementia." I nodded thoughtfully. Memory problems. Like what? Like forgetting Dad is gone, like asking the same questions over and over, like losing track of time and dates.
I see. And you've both noticed these memory problems. Yes, they said in unison. When did you first notice them? Sarah answered, "A few months ago. You were talking to someone in your front yard, but there was no one there." According to Mrs. Patterson. Yes. I stood up and walked to my front window, looking out at the yard where Robert and I had spent countless hours gardening together. That's interesting because I called Mrs. Patterson yesterday to ask her about that conversation. She says she never called you, Sarah. She says she never saw me talking to anyone in the friend yard.
The color drained from Sarah's face. She must have forgotten. Maybe, or maybe you lied. Thomas tried to intervene. Mom, you're getting upset. This is exactly the kind of confusion we're worried about. I turned to face them both, feeling the anger that I had been suppressing for months finally beginning to surface. Let me ask you something else. Thomas, you told Sarah that I insisted Dad was coming home for dinner during your visit last month. When exactly did I say that? You don't remember? I remember everything about your visit perfectly. I remember every conversation we had, every meal we shared, every question you asked me. At no point did I mention Dad coming home for dinner. Mom, you're not thinking clearly. Actually, my thinking has never been clearer. I walked to my desk and pulled out a folder full of documents. In fact, my thinking has been so clear that I've been keeping detailed records of our conversations for the past 3 months. I opened the folder and began reading. October 15th, Sarah claims Mrs. Patterson called her about me talking to someone who wasn't there. Mrs. Patterson confirms she made no such call. Sarah started to speak, but I held up my hand. October 22nd, Sarah reports to Thomas that I asked 3 times about feeding a cat I haven't owned in 10 years. I never mentioned any cat. November 3rd, Thomas claims I said Dad was coming home for dinner. No such conversation occurred. November 10th, during Dr. Williams' visit, Sarah told him I had been having memory problems for months. The only memory problems I've had were the ones I deliberately performed for your benefit. Thomas was staring at me like he was seeing a ghost. What are you saying? I'm saying that for the past 6 months, I've been pretending to have memory problems while you two have been planning to steal my life. I reached into the folder and pulled out transcripts of recorded conversations. November 15th, Sarah speaking to Michael. Once we have an official diagnosis of dementia, the guardianship proceedings should be straightforward. Sarah's face went white. November 15th, Sarah speaking to Michael. Once we have guardianship, we can sell the house and move her into a care facility. Mom, you don't understand. We were just trying to protect you. Protect me? From what? From my own money? From my own home? From my own life? Thomas found his voice. You were clearly having memory problems. We saw it ourselves. You saw exactly what I wanted you to see. Every confused moment, every forgotten name, every lost conversation, all of it was an act. I walked to my study door and called out, James, would you join us, please? James Morrison emerged from the study, carrying a briefcase and a digital recorder. His presence transformed the atmosphere in the room, making it clear that this was no longer just a family discussion, but something with potential legal ramifications. James has been my attorney for 12 years, I told my children. He has recordings of our conversations, copies of all the medical and legal documents related to your scheme, and sworn affidavits detailing your attempts to have me falsely declared incompetent. Sarah was crying now, tears streaming down her face as the full magnitude of her exposure became clear. Mom, we thought you were sick. We thought we were helping you. You thought I was sitting on $2 million that you wanted to control. You thought you could manipulate medical professionals into declaring me incompetent so you could steal my home and my savings. That's not true. I pulled out one final document from the folder.
This is a transcript of your phone conversation with Thomas from November 10th. Would you like me to read the part where you discuss selling my house and putting me in the cheapest facility we can find that's adequate for someone with dementia? The room fell completely silent, except for the sound of Sarah's quiet sobbing and the ticking of the grandfather clock that Robert had inherited from his father.
Here's what's going to happen, I continued, my voice steady despite the turmoil I felt inside. You're both going to leave my house and not contact me unless I contact you first. James has prepared restraining orders if necessary. Mom, please, we're your children. My children would never have tried to steal my life. My children would never have lied to doctors about my mental state. My children would never have plotted to put me in an institution based on fabricated evidence. Thomas stood up slowly, his face pale and his hands shaking slightly. What if we had been right? What if you really had been developing dementia? Then you should have talked to me about it. You should have involved me in decisions about my own care. You should have treated me with dignity and respect instead of like an obstacle to be removed. We didn't know how to talk to you about it. So instead, you decided to lie, manipulate, and conspire behind my back. You decided that your financial interests were more important than my autonomy. James stepped forward with the measured authority of someone who had handled many similar cases. Mrs. Hayes has asked me to inform you that she is considering legal action for attempted fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy. However, she is willing to forego those proceedings if you agree to have no further contact with her and make no future attempts to interfere with her financial or medical affairs. Sarah looked up from her crying, mascara running down her cheeks. You would really never see us again? You made that choice when you decided to treat me like an incompetent old woman whose life and money were yours to control. But we're family, Thomas protested. Families work through problems. They don't just abandon each other. You abandoned me the moment you decided that my money was more important than my dignity, I replied. You abandoned me when you chose to see me as a burden rather than as your mother. Sarah tried one more approach, her voice desperate. What about your grandchildren? Don't you want to be part of their lives? It was a cruel manipulation, using my love for my grandchildren as leverage. But I had thought about this possibility during my months of planning. My grandchildren will learn about their grandmother from whatever you choose to tell them. But I won't be manipulated by people who were willing to destroy my life for money, even if those people happen to be my children. The finality in my voice seemed to convince them that there would be no negotiation, no compromise, no pathway back to the relationship we had once had.
Thomas walked toward the door, then turned back for one last attempt. Mom, I'm sorry. We both are. We never meant for things to go this far. You meant exactly for things to go this far, I replied. You planned every step of this scheme. The only thing you didn't plan for was getting cut. They left that day, and I haven't spoken to them since. The aftermath was both liberating and devastating. I was free from their manipulation and secure in my independence, but I was also alone in a way I had never been before. The house that had once been filled with family gatherings and holiday celebrations became quiet in a way that went beyond Robert's absence. Dr. Williams called me a few days later, confused by what Sarah had told him about our family meeting. When I explained the situation, he was appalled by how he had been manipulated into supporting their scheme. Mrs. Hayes, I am so sorry, he said during an emergency appointment. I trusted their assessment of your condition without doing my own independent evaluation. That was a serious failure on my part.
You were doing what most doctors do when family members express concern about an elderly patient, I told him. but perhaps this experience will make you more careful about accepting family reports at face value. He conducted a comprehensive cognitive evaluation, which confirmed what we both already knew, that my mind was completely intact. He documented this evaluation carefully and provided me with a letter stating that I showed no signs of dementia or cognitive impairment. The irony was profound. In trying to prove I was mentally incompetent, my children had actually proved how sharp and capable I really am. They couldn't outsmart a woman they thought was losing her mind. James Morrison helped me put additional protections in place to prevent future attempts at manipulation. We created detailed advance directives that specified exactly how I wanted medical decisions to be made if I ever did become incapacitated. We established clear procedures for any future guardianship proceedings, including requirements for independent medical evaluation and legal representation.
Most importantly, we documented the entire scheme my children had attempted, creating a legal record that would protect me if they ever tried something similar in the future. But the legal protections, while necessary, couldn't address the emotional devastation of learning who my children really were underneath the mask they had worn for so many years. I spent many nights sitting in Robert's chair, wondering where I had gone wrong as a mother. Had I raised children who were fundamentally selfish and greedy? Had I failed to instill proper values? Had I somehow created people who could justify betraying their own mother for money? My friend Margaret from the book club, who had been through her own family difficulties, offered a different perspective. Eleanor, you didn't create their character flaws. You raised them with love and good values, but at some point, people make their own choices about who they want to be. Their choices reflect who they are, not who you are as a mother.
Her words helped, but the pain remained. The children I had loved unconditionally had proven that their love for me was conditional on my usefulness to them. I also had to grapple with the realization that my performance during those 6 months had been perhaps too convincing. I had succeeded in fooling everyone, including medical professionals, about my mental state. The ease with which I had been able to simulate cognitive decline was both a testament to my acting abilities and a sobering reminder of how vulnerable elderly people are to having their competence questioned. But I also learned something important about myself during those months of pretending to be confused. I learned that I was stronger than I thought, smarter than my children gave me credit for, and perfectly capable of protecting myself from people who would take advantage of me.
The months that followed were a period of adjustment and redefinition. I had to figure out how to live with the knowledge that my children were not the people I had believed them to be. I had to create a new normal for my life that didn't include them. I threw myself into my volunteer work at the Literacy Center, finding purpose in helping adults learn to read. I expanded my involvement with the Historical Society, taking on leadership roles in preservation projects. I traveled to visit my sister in Florida more frequently, strengthening relationships with extended family members who valued me for who I was rather than what I owned. I also began speaking to other elderly people about the importance of protecting themselves from financial exploitation, even by family members. My experience, while painful, had given me insights that could help others avoid similar betrayals. 6 months after confronting my children, I received a letter from Sarah.
It was long and emotional, full of apologies and explanations. She claimed that financial pressure had made them desperate, that they had convinced themselves they were acting in my best interest, that they never intended for things to go as far as they did.
The letter felt calculated, like another manipulation. It focused heavily on their financial difficulties, their children's needs, their fear that I might waste my money or be taken advantage of by strangers. Even in her apology, Sarah was still trying to justify their actions and make me feel responsible for their financial problems. I didn't respond to the letter. 3 months later, Thomas called and left a voicemail asking if we could meet to discuss moving forward as a family. His message was shorter than Sarah's letter, but contained the same basic elements: apologies mixed with justifications, acknowledgement of wrongdoing combined with requests for forgiveness. I didn't return his call. The truth was that I no longer trusted them, and I doubted I ever would again. They had shown me who they really were when they thought I was vulnerable, and that knowledge couldn't be erased by apologies or explanations. But perhaps most importantly, I had discovered that I didn't need their approval or their presence to live a full and meaningful life. For too many years, I had defined my worth partly through my role as their mother. Their betrayal had forced me to find my identity in my own accomplishments, my own relationships, and my own choices. A year after the confrontation, I made a decision that surprised even me. I contacted a lawyer who specialized in charitable giving and began the process of donating the majority of my estate to organizations that support elderly people who are being abused or exploited by family members. The irony was perfect. The money my children had schemed to steal would instead go to help other elderly people protect themselves from similar schemes. I kept enough money to ensure my own security and independence for the rest of my life, but the bulk of my assets would be used to fund legal aid programs, support groups, and educational initiatives for elderly people at risk of financial exploitation.
When the legal documents were finalized, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced since Robert's death. My money would be used for something meaningful rather than simply inherited by people who had proven they didn't deserve it. I'm still living in my house, still managing my own finances, still making my own decisions about my life. Dr. Williams continues to confirm that I show no signs of cognitive impairment. My volunteer work continues to be fulfilling, and my friendships have deepened now that I'm not distracted by worry about my children's true feelings toward me. The roses in my garden continue to bloom each year, and I tend them with the same care Robert showed when he was alive. Sometimes, when I'm working among the flowers he planted, I talk to him about what happened with our children. I like to think he would be proud of how I handled the situation, even though I know he would be heartbroken by their betrayal.
The hardest part isn't being estranged from my children. The hardest part is knowing who they really are underneath the masks they wore for so many years. But that knowledge, painful as it is, has also been liberating. I no longer have to wonder if their affection is genuine or worry about their motives when they contact me. I learned that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally are the ones most willing to exploit your vulnerability. But I also learned that I'm stronger than anyone, including myself, gave me credit for. The woman they thought was losing her mind turned out to be the smartest person in the room, and that woman is living her life exactly as she chooses, free from manipulation, free from exploitation, and free from people who mistake her kindness for weakness. If you enjoyed this story, let me know in the comments.
Have you ever had to deal with family members who underestimated you? How far would you go to protect yourself from people trying to take advantage of you?
Sometimes the greatest victory isn't getting revenge, it's getting free.